Ethan Brooks dropped to his knees on the wet asphalt, locked both hands over the woman's chest, and started compressions. "Stay with me," he said through his teeth. "Come on. Stay with me." Her lips were going blue. Her eyes were closed. The truck that had clipped her was already 30 feet down the street. The driver, stumbling out with shaking hands, and everyone on the sidewalk was standing exactly where they were, standing frozen, watching, not moving, while Ethan counted compressions under his breath and tilted her head back and breathed into her mouth and came back up and pressed down again. 30 compressions, 2 breaths, repeat. He had trained for this once. Years ago, in a church basement on a Thursday night, because it was free, and he thought a father raising a child alone should know how. He never thought he would use it on a stranger, in the street, on the morning of the most important interview of his life. He pressed down. Again, she gasped. Her chest rose on its own. He sat back on his heels, his hands shaking for the first time, and the folder that had been under his arm was open on the ground beside him, papers soaked through. His carefully printed resume face down in a puddle, and he did not look at it once. What no one on that sidewalk knew was that the woman he had just pulled back from the edge of dying was Olivia Hart, and the building she owned was the exact building Ethan had been walking toward when he heard her fall. Drop a comment and tell me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you haven't subscribed yet, do it now, because this one is going somewhere you won't see coming. The alarm didn't wake Ethan Brooks that Tuesday morning. He was already awake. He had been awake since 4:15, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold an hour ago, reading through the same 4 pages he had read 17 times in the last 3 weeks. The papers were printed on the cheap paper from the library printer, 11 cents a page, which meant he had spent almost $2 just preparing for this one conversation. He had highlighted 3 sections in yellow. He had written notes in the margins in blue ink. He had rehearsed answers to questions he anticipated them asking, standing in the bathroom at midnight while Lily slept, talking quietly to his own reflection because he couldn't afford to wake her up, and explain why her father was practicing sentences in the dark. The folder sat open on the table. Hart Innovations Senior Operations Coordinator. Level 2. The salary listed on the posting was $62,000 a year, plus benefits, plus the health insurance that Ethan had been calculating the cost of for the past 8 months, ever since Lily's pediatrician mentioned the word monitoring in a tone that made Ethan's chest tighten every time he thought about it. $62,000. He said it quietly to himself sometimes. Not because he was greedy, not because he wanted luxury, but because $62,000 meant Lily could see the specialist without Ethan having to decide between that appointment and the electric bill. It meant he could stop picking up the 3rd job on weekends. It meant he could be home when she came back from school instead of already gone. He closed the folder. He stood up, washed his coffee mug, and went to wake his daughter. Lily was 8 years old and had her mother's dark hair and her mother's way of sleeping with one arm thrown over her face like she was blocking out the whole world. Ethan stood in the doorway for a moment and watched her breathe. He did that, sometimes stood there long enough to feel it settle over him. The fact that she was still here, that she was fine, that the world hadn't taken her the way it had taken Claire. "Lilybug," he said. "Time." She groaned into her pillow. "Lily, 5 more minutes. You said that yesterday, and I gave them to you, and you were late. That was different." How was it different? She pulled the blanket over her head. "I was more tired, despite everything, despite the cold coffee, and the practiced answers, and the 4 months of preparation, and the way his stomach was already starting to knot itself into a shape he didn't have a word for." Ethan smiled. He crossed the room, sat on the edge of her bed, and pulled the blanket back, just enough to see her face. "I've got the interview today," he said. She opened one eye. "I know. So I need you to be good for Mrs. Delgado until I pick you up. I'm always good. You argued with her for 40 minutes last Thursday about whether penguins are birds. They don't fly. That's a valid point, Lily. Fine, she sat up, her hair going in 4 directions, and looked at him with the kind of serious assessment that still caught him off guard sometimes. Because it was so completely Claire's expression, transplanted onto this small face. You're going to do good, she said, not as a question, as a statement of fact. Yeah? You know everything about everything. They'd be dumb not to pick you. He kissed the top of her head. Get dressed. I made oatmeal. I hate oatmeal, I know. I put brown sugar in it. I'll be right there. He had the routine down to a science after 3 years of doing it alone. Breakfast for Lily, lunch-packed peanut butter on wheat, apple slices, the little bag of pretzels she liked backpacked by the door. Coat, shoes, the 2-block walk to Mrs. Delgado's apartment on the 3rd floor of the building next door. Mrs. Delgado was 67 and had been watching Lily since she was 5. And she was one of the 3 people Ethan trusted completely in this world. The other 2 were Lily herself and his friend Danny, who worked nights at the hospital and had covered 3 of Ethan's shifts at the restaurant when Lily had the flu last February without being asked. The world was small when you were raising a child alone. But sometimes the small things were the ones that held. He dropped Lily at Mrs. Delgado's door at 7:40. Lily walked in without looking back, which was exactly how Ethan wanted it. He wanted her to feel safe enough to not look back, but he stood in the hallway for 3 seconds anyway, listening to Mrs. Delgado's voice and Lily's answer, and the sound of the television already on in the background. Then he turned and went downstairs and stood on the sidewalk in the November air with his folder under his arm and his good suit, the only good suit, the one he'd had dry cleaned specifically for this, and he felt, for the first time that morning, something close to hope. Not certainty. He wasn't a man who let himself get close to certainty about things that hadn't happened yet. Claire had taught him that, though not intentionally. You could be certain about a Wednesday afternoon and still have it end with a phone call and a strange voice on the line saying words that didn't side the shape of the day you thought you were living. But hope was different from certainty. Hope was just the decision to keep walking in the direction of something better. He started walking. The company was 22 blocks north. He had mapped it 4 times. He knew the route. He knew the backup route. He knew which intersections tended to back up in the morning and which ones moved. He had timed the walk twice last week, once on Thursday, once on Friday, and both times it took him between 31 and 34 minutes. He was leaving at 7:50. The interview was at 8:45. He had a full hour of buffer. He had thought of everything. He passed the coffee cart on the corner of 9th and walked the long block toward the bridge underpass. Collar turned up against the wind, and he was running through the opening question. Tell me about yourself. Which was the one he had worked hardest on, because the answer had to be honest, without being desperate, confident, without being arrogant, specific without oversharing when he heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like a change in the air, a collective shift in the noise of the street around him. The way a room goes quiet when something wrong starts to happen. He looked up. The intersection at the end of the block was wide. 4 lanes with a concrete median and a traffic light cycling green. A woman had stepped off the curb on the far side business clothes. A bag over one shoulder, moving quickly the way people do when they're running late and pretending they're not, and she had made it almost to the median when the truck came. It wasn't a speeding truck. That was the thing people would misremember later. It wasn't going impossibly fast. It was going exactly the speed that made it dangerous, fast enough to be lethal. Slow enough that you almost thought it would stop in time. The driver had looked down, a second, maybe 2, and in those 2 seconds, the front end had drifted 6 feet to the left, and the woman on the median was standing exactly where the front quarter panel was going to be when it didn't stop. She didn't see it. She was looking at her phone. Ethan was running before he made a decision. That was the truest thing about it. There was no moment where he weighed the options. No calculation, no choice. His body went before his brain finished the sentence. He covered the distance. in a way he couldn't have described afterward. Pure mechanics, pure urgency, and he hit the woman from behind, with both hands flat against her shoulders, and shoved. She went left. The mirror caught his arm on the right side. A sharp metallic tear from elbow to wrist, and the wind blast of the truck hit him a half-second later, as it passed 3 feet from where he was standing. He heard brakes. He heard someone screaming. He heard, very clearly and distinctly, the sound of papers hitting wet pavement, and he turned and saw his folder open on the asphalt. The pages spreading across the lane in the wind from the truck's passing, and the blue-inked notes he had written in the margins were already absorbing water from a puddle near the curb. The woman was on her hands and knees on the median. Alive, breathing hard. He went to her first. "Are you hurt?" he said. She looked up at him. She was somewhere in her early 40s. Dark hair, expensive coat, a cut on her palm from the pavement that was starting to bleed. She was looking at him, the way people look at something they can't quite process yet. "Are you hurt?" he said again. "I know," she said. "I don't think." She looked down at her hand. Can you stand?" She took the hand he offered and got to her feet. Around them, the intersection had gone strange, and still a cluster of people on the sidewalk. A cab stopped in the street. The truck pulled over at the corner with the driver already out and pale-faced. Ethan noticed all of it and filed it away and focused on the woman in front of him. "Your arm," she said. He looked down. The sleeve of his good suit, the only good suit, the dry-cleaned one, was torn from the elbow to the cuff, and the skin underneath was bleeding in a long diagonal line that was starting to sting in the cold air. "It's fine," he said. "It's not fine, it's your bleeding. Do you have someone to call? Do you want me to stay with you until stop?" She put her hand on his arm, not the injured one, and looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately name. "Stop taking care of me for a second. You're the one who's hurt. I'm fine. You said that already. Because it's still true." She stared at him. There was something happening behind her eyes that he didn't have time to analyze. "Your papers," she said. He turned. A few of the pages had blown further down the street. Someone had stepped on one of them. The folder itself was soaked through on one side. He walked over and picked up what was salvageable, which wasn't much, and stood there with the wet pages in his good hand and looked at his watch. 8:17. The interview was at 8:45. The company was still 14 blocks north. He did the math in the time it took him to breathe once. He couldn't make it. Not on foot, not looking the way he looked right now. Arm bleeding, suit torn, papers destroyed. He could try to find a cab, there was always the possibility of a cab, but at 8:17 on a Tuesday, the cabs in this district were impossible, and he knew it. And even if he found one, there was no version of arriving in the next 12 minutes that looked anything like what he had planned. 4 months, 17 readings of the same 4 pages. Midnight in the bathroom, rehearsing answers to questions. He stood there on the wet asphalt with his ruined folder and his torn suit and let himself feel exactly how much it cost 3 full seconds. No more, and then he let it go. He turned back to the woman. She was still watching him. "You should get that hand looked at," he said. "There's an urgent care on Meridian, 2 blocks east. It's not serious, but you'll want it cleaned. She stopped. Started again. "You just missed something important. Didn't you?" He looked at her steadily. "I don't know what you mean. Your papers. You were going somewhere. It doesn't matter. It matters to me." He almost said it didn't again. Because that was the honest reflex to minimize, to move on, to not make his losses into someone else's burden. But there was something in the way she was looking at him that made the deflection feel wrong. Not in a manipulative way, in a genuine way, like she actually wanted to know. "I had a job interview," he said, "at Hart Innovations." 8:45. She went very still. He noticed it, the specific quality of stillness that moved through her, but he didn't know what to make of it. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had changed in a way he couldn't put his finger on. "Don't be. These things happen." "What kind of position?" He looked at her, mildly puzzled by the question. Senior Operations Coordinator. Level 2, he paused. Why? She didn't answer immediately. She was looking at him with that unnameable expression again. The one he'd noticed right after she stood up. Assessing. Not calculating, there was a difference. Calculating implied coldness. This was something warmer than that. I'm Olivia, she said. Ethan Brooks. She put out her uninjured hand. He shook it. Ethan, she said, I want you to know something. What you just did. She stopped. Took a breath. Looked away for a moment, and then looked back. People don't do that. In this city, in this world, people don't just run towards something like that. Everyone else on this block stepped back. I watched them. I saw them step back. He didn't know what to say to that. So he said nothing. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. If you'd known, if someone had told you a minute ago, that stopping would mean missing the interview, would you have still done it? He thought about it. Genuinely thought about it, not performing consideration, but actually checking himself. The way he always did when Lily asked him a question that deserved a real answer. Yes, he said. Why? Because you were going to get hit. She waited. Like she thought there was more. That's it, he said. That's the whole reason. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag, the shoulder bag, that had somehow survived the fall, and took out a business card and held it toward him. He took it. He read it. He read it again. The name on the card was Olivia Hart. Beneath it, in small, clean type, Founder and Chief Executive Officer. Hart Innovations. He looked up at her. She was watching his face with the careful attention of someone who had learned, over a long time, to read what people did with information they weren't expecting. He looked back down at the card, then up at her again. He started. Yes. The interview I just missed was at my company. Yes. He stood there on the wet asphalt, holding a business card with both of their futures on it, and tried to find the appropriate thing to say. He laughed. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't bitterness, and it wasn't false. It was the particular laugh of a man who has been around long enough to recognize the specific absurdity of the universe when it decides to make a point. Olivia Hart blinked, and then slowly, carefully, like someone who hadn't done it in a while and wasn't entirely sure the mechanism still worked. She laughed, too. I'm sorry, he said when it passed. I don't even know what that is. It's genuinely the strangest morning I've had in years, she said. And I once had a board meeting interrupted by a fire suppression system, malfunction, and a senator. He looked down at the card again. Then he held it back toward her. She frowned. What are you doing? I don't want you to feel obligated, he said. Whatever you're thinking right now, if you're thinking about making something happen because of what just happened, I appreciate it. But I don't want that. She didn't take the card back. Why not? Because I didn't do it for a job. I did it because he stopped. Started again. I have a daughter. She's 8. And the one thing I care about, more than getting that interview right, is being able to look her in the eye when I come home. If I got a position because someone felt they owed me, that's not something I can explain to her in a way I'm proud of. Olivia Hart stared at him. He held the card out between them, steady. Keep it, she said finally. Miss Hart, keep it. I'm not offering you anything right now. I'm not promising anything. I'm just asking you to keep the card. He looked at her. Ethan. Her voice was very even, very clear. I've been running a company for 11 years. I have met, I don't know, thousands of people. In conference rooms, in pitch meetings, at fundraisers, at dinners, where everyone's performing something for everyone else. And in 11 years, I can count on one hand the number of times someone surprised me. She paused. You just used up a finger. He looked down at the card one more time. He put it in the inside pocket of his ruined jacket. Your hand still needs to be looked at, he said. I know. Meridian and 4th. East. 2 blocks. I know where it is. But she was almost smiling when she said it. And that was something he would think about later. In the quiet of his apartment, after Lily was asleep. When the whole morning had settled into the particular shape that strange days take when they're over. A cab appeared at the corner, the kind of timing that only happened when you'd already stopped expecting anything, and Olivia turned toward it. "Ethan," she said. "Yeah. What's Lily's favorite thing to do on weekends?" He blinked. "What? Your daughter. What does she like to do?" She likes to go to the park and look for birds. She keeps a list. She has 47 species so far. She calls it her life list." Olivia nodded like this answered something she'd been wondering about. She got in the cab. He stood on the sidewalk and watched it pull away into traffic. And then he was alone on the wet street with a torn suit and an aching arm and a business card in his pocket and no interview and no job. He started walking home. At the next block, his phone rang. "Unknown number. Ethan Brooks," he answered, because he always answered that way when he didn't recognize the number. Mr. Brooks. A voice he didn't recognize. Professional. Efficient. "My name is James Whitfield. I'm Director of Personnel Operations at Hart Innovations. I'm calling because Ms. Hart contacted us this morning and has asked that we reach out to you." He stopped walking. "She'd like to reschedule your interview," the voice continued. "But I want to be clear about something, because Ms. Hart was very specific about this. This is not a different process. This is not an accommodation. You will be going through the full evaluation along with the other candidates. Ms. Hart does not want special treatment on the table." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "She said those words?" he said. "She said no special treatment?" Her exact phrasing was, "Tell him it's a real door, not a courtesy one. He'll know what that means." Ethan stood on the sidewalk in the cold November air and understood exactly what that meant. "When?" he said. "Thursday morning, 8:30. Use the main entrance on Carver Street. I'll be there." He hung up and stood still for a moment. The city moving around him. And he thought about Lily's 47 birds and the ruined folder and the way Olivia Hart had laughed, like someone rediscovering a habit and the specific arithmetic of a morning where everything went wrong in a way that might, in the end, have been the only thing that could go right. He went home. He changed out of the torn suit. He cleaned the cut on his arm at the bathroom sink, which stung considerably, more than he'd let on in the street. And he stood in front of the mirror and looked at himself for a long moment without rehearsing anything. Then he got out his notes and started preparing for Thursday. He had 2 days. He had survived worse with less. And somewhere in a building 22 blocks north, in an office on a floor he hadn't stood on yet, a woman whose life he'd saved was sitting at a desk and telling herself for reasons she couldn't entirely articulate to anyone, including herself, that she wanted to see what Ethan Brooks looked like when he walked through a real door. She had been surprised exactly 5 times in 11 years. She was already thinking about 6. Meanwhile, across the city, in a glass-walled office on the 14th floor of Hart Innovations, a man named Marcus Vale was reading an email he had not been meant to see, a brief internal note from Olivia Hart's personal assistant to the scheduling team, flagging a candidate named Ethan Brooks for interview rescheduling at the direct request of the CEO. Marcus Vale read it twice. He set down his coffee. He was 44 years old and had been at Hart Innovations for 9 years and had spent the last 3 of those years positioning himself carefully and methodically for the Director of Strategic Operations role that had been quietly promised to him by the previous COO, a promise that had never been put in writing, which Marcus had accepted as a calculated risk and which had become considerably more complicated 6 months ago when Olivia Hart had announced she was bringing in an outside perspective. Outside perspective. That was what she'd called it. Marcus had understood what it meant. He had spent 3 months figuring out exactly who the competition would be. The name Ethan Brooks had not appeared on any of the lists he'd developed. Until now. He read the email a 3rd time. He picked up his phone and called a number that wasn't in his company directory. "I need some background," he said, when the call connected. "On a man named Ethan Brooks. Everything you can find by Wednesday night." He hung up. He picked up his coffee again. He looked out the 14th floor window at the city below. at the streets where people moved like numbers in an equation he'd been solving for 9 years. And he thought about the word threat the way a man thinks about something he hasn't taken seriously yet and is realizing. Too late, he probably should have. Ethan Brooks had no idea that the second complication of his week had already begun. He was at his kitchen table, reading his notes for the 4th time, with a cup of coffee that was still hot, and a daughter who would be home in 3 hours, and a Thursday morning on the calendar that felt, for the first time in a long time, like something worth arriving at. He was a man who had spent 3 years learning to live without certainty. But hope he still had. He turned the page. He kept reading. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes after someone finally called 911. Ethan knew because he counted. He counted the way he counted compressions, not to track time, but because counting gave his hands something to trust while how everything else was uncertain. By the time the paramedics came through the crowd and knelt beside Olivia Hart, she was breathing on her own, conscious, trying to sit up, and one of the paramedics put a firm hand on her shoulder and told her to stop moving in the tone of someone who had said that sentence 10,000 times. Ethan stood up. His knees were wet from the asphalt. His hands were shaking not badly, but enough that he noticed. Enough that he pressed them flat against his thighs and held them still the way his father had once taught him to hold, still after something hard. You feel it, and then you put it somewhere, and then you keep going. His father had not been a complicated man, but some of what he said had stayed. A police officer appeared at his left elbow. Young, early 20s, notebook already open. You the one who performed CPR? Yes. And you were here when it happened? When the vehicle made contact. I was half a block south. I saw her go down. The officer wrote something. Did you see the truck before she fell? I saw it drift. The driver looked down. By the time he looked back up, it was already too late for him to correct. How far did the vehicle get before it stopped? 35 feet. The driver pulled over on his own. The officer nodded and wrote more things and asked 3 more questions that Ethan answered with the same flat accuracy he'd used for the first ones. He wasn't being cold. He was being useful. There was a difference, and he understood it, even if the officer probably didn't. When the officer moved away, Ethan looked back toward the ambulance. Olivia was sitting up on the gurney now. They had an oxygen mask near her face, but she kept moving it aside. And the paramedic, a woman with a gray braid, and the particular patience of someone who dealt with stubborn people professionally, kept moving it back. Their eyes met across the space. Olivia said something to the paramedic. The paramedic said something back. Olivia pointed, specifically and deliberately, at Ethan. The paramedic looked at him. Then she waved him over with the kind of efficiency that left no room for debate. He walked over. He stood at the edge of the gurney and looked at Olivia Hart and was struck, not for the first time that morning, by the gap between what a person looked like from the outside and what was actually happening inside them. She had expensive clothes and the kind of bearing that came from years of being the person other people looked to. And right now she looked like someone who had just been reminded that none of that mattered when the lights went out. They want to take me to St. Catherine's, she said. Her voice was hoarse. The oxygen mask had done that. Or the shock, or both. You should go. I know I should go. I'm going. She paused. I wanted to see your face first. Why? Because you're the one who she stopped. Pressed her lips together. The composure she was reaching for kept sliding just out of reach, and he could see her catching it each time, pulling it back, which told him something about how much work she was doing just to sound like herself. You breathed for me, she said finally. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to that. Nothing, he said. You don't have to say anything, Ethan. She said his name like she'd known it longer than 6 minutes. What were you walking toward this morning, before? He looked at her. Tell me, she said. An interview. At a company on Carver Street. Which company? Hart Innovations. The silence that came after that sentence was a specific kind of silence. Not empty. Full. Full of something neither of them had a clean word for. She stared at him. He waited. "You're the 845, she said. I was the 845. She looked at the paramedic. "Give us 1 minute." The paramedic made a face that said she had opinions about this request. But she stepped back 2 feet, which was the professional equivalent of privacy in the middle of a street. Olivia looked back at Ethan. "Your resume. Everything in that folder." What was in it? Printed application. Reference letters. Work history. Notes I wrote on the position requirements. He paused. "They're in a puddle on the other side of the intersection." What were the notes? He almost deflected. He almost said something dismissive about the notes not mattering now. But she was asking in a way that meant she actually wanted to know. And he had a rule with himself about not dismissing genuine questions. "I wrote out every operational problem I could find in public reports about your company," he said. "Supply chain lag in the third-party vendor contracts. Communication gaps between the field teams and the internal analytics group. The turnover rate in the Level 1 coordinator positions, which suggests a management structure problem that's probably costing you more than you're calculating." He stopped. "I was going to walk in and tell them I'd already started thinking about the job." She was very still. "How long did that take you?" she said. "About 3 weeks. You spent 3 weeks analyzing my company before a job interview. I spent 3 weeks analyzing it because I needed to know if I actually wanted to work there. Not just if they'd take me." He paused. "There's a difference." The paramedic stepped back in. "Ms. Hart, we need to move." Olivia reached into her bag. The paramedic made a sound of protest and pulled out a card and held it toward Ethan. He looked at it. He looked at her. "I told you before," he said. "I don't want I know what you said. I heard you." Her voice had an edge in it now. Not anger, but something firm. "This isn't a reward. This isn't a courtesy. This is me telling you that the door I came through this morning is the same door you were walking toward. And I don't believe that happened by accident. And I'm not the kind of person who ignores things that don't happen by accident." She pushed the card toward him. "Keep it. Do what you want with it. But keep it." He took it. She let the paramedic move her toward the ambulance doors. And just before they closed, she looked back at him one more time. And whatever she was going to say, she decided against it. And the doors shut, and the ambulance pulled into traffic. He stood on the sidewalk, holding a business card in his wet hand, and looked at the name printed on it. Olivia Hart, founder and chief executive officer, Hart Innovations. He was standing exactly 22 blocks from the building on the card. He looked down at where his folder had been. The pages were still there. Some of them had blown against the curb. One had wrapped itself around a signpost in a way that looked almost deliberate, like someone had placed it there for him to find. He walked over and peeled it off the post. It was the reference letter from Danny, which Danny had written in the particular blunt style of a man who didn't own a thesaurus and didn't believe in needing one. It said, among other things, that Ethan Brooks was the kind of person you called when something was actually wrong, as opposed to the kind of person you called when you wanted someone to make you feel better about something being wrong, and that there was a significant difference between those 2 categories of human being. The letter was wet but legible. Ethan folded it carefully and put it in his jacket pocket alongside the business card. Then he went home. He didn't cry on the walk back. He didn't rage. He moved through the morning city with the same quiet precision he used for everything. Because he had learned, and this was one of the harder lessons, one that had come through 3 years of doing every difficult thing alone, that the moments that broke you were not the big obvious ones. They were the small quiet ones that arrived after. The moment you unlocked your apartment door, the moment you sat down in the chair that still had Lily's juice cup on the side table from breakfast. The moment the morning went completely still and there was nothing left to do but be inside what had happened. He sat down at the kitchen table. He put the card and the letter flat on the table in front of him. He looked at them for a long time. His phone rang. Unknown number Ethan Brooks. Mr. Brooks, my name is James Whitfield. I'm Director of Personnel Operations at Hart Innovations. He straightened without meaning to. Ms. Hart contacted us approximately 15 minutes ago, the voice continued. She's asked that we reach out to you regarding this morning's interview. I understand if the position she'd like to reschedule. A brief pause. But I want to be very clear, Mr. Brooks, because Ms. Hart was specific about this. The process will be identical to what every other candidate is going through. Full evaluation panel, case assessment, the complete sequence. Ms. Hart was explicit that she does not want any accommodation in the evaluation. Ethan was quiet. She did ask me to pass along a message, Whitfield said. She said to tell you, it's a real door, not a courtesy one. She said you'd know what that means. I know what it means. Thursday morning. 8:30. Main entrance on Carver. I'll be there. He hung up. He sat with that for a moment, really sat with it. The way you sit with something when you know you're going to need to remember it clearly later. Then he got up, changed his clothes, cleaned the cut on his arm with the first aid kit under the bathroom sink, and went to pick up Lily 4 hours early because he needed to hear her voice tell him something ridiculous about birds. Mrs. Delgado opened the door and took one look at the bandage on his arm and said, Dios mío, what happened to you? Small accident. I'm fine. You look like something the street kept. Is Lily? She's fine. She's been telling me about a yellow-rumped warbler for the last hour. I don't know what that is, but apparently it's very exciting, Mrs. Delgado stepped back from the door. Come in. I'll make coffee. Real coffee, not that brown water you drink. He came in. Lily came out of the back room in a rush, saw him, and stopped dead. Kids had a radar for wrong. He had learned that fast after Claire died. You couldn't hide disruption from a child the way you could hide it from adults. Because adults were polite enough to accept the performance, and children just looked at you until they found the thing you weren't saying. What happened to your arm? Lily said. I helped someone this morning. What kind of helped? He sat down on Mrs. Delgado's couch and told her. Not the whole thing, not the compressions. Not the blue lips, not the 7 minutes of counting, but enough. He told her. A woman fell in the street, and he made sure she was okay, and it cost him the interview, and he was going back Thursday. Lily listened the way she always listened, completely. Without interrupting, eyes steady on his face. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Did she live? Lily said. She did. Another moment. Then it was the right thing, Lily said. Yeah, Thursday's just a different day. Same door. He looked at her. Where'd you get that? She shrugged. You say it all the time. Different day. Same door. He didn't remember saying that. Bit manned. But it sounded like something he might have said in some late-night moment when he was explaining the world to an 8-year-old and trying to make it sound like something that could be survived. Go get your backpack, he said. We're going to the park. It's cold. Dress warm. Bring the list. She was gone from the room in 4 seconds, which was the fastest she'd moved all morning, and Mrs. Delgado handed him a cup of actual coffee and said nothing, because she was a woman who understood when a man needed something warm without needing to talk about why. He drank the coffee. He looked at the business card on the table where he'd set it down. Olivia Hart, Chief Executive Officer. He turned it over. On the back, in handwriting that was fast and slightly tilted, she had written 4 words before she handed it to him in the street. He hadn't noticed until now. He read them. You already have it. He stared at those 4 words for a long time. He was still trying to decide what exactly she meant when Lily came back with her coat and her backpack and the battered notebook she used for the bird list. And she grabbed his hand and pulled, and he put the card in his pocket and stood up. And for the first time since 4:15 that morning, he felt the knot in his chest begin. Very slowly to loosen, they went to the park. Lily found a cedar waxwing on a branch near the south path and spent 11 minutes watching it through the small binoculars Ethan had found at a church sale for $3, And she wrote Cedar Waxwing under number 48 in the notebook in her careful, deliberate handwriting, and Ethan stood beside her in the cold and watched her face. This was the thing. This was the thing he was working for. Not the salary number, not the health insurance, not even the stability. Exactly. It was this, the ability to stand next to her in a park on a Tuesday morning and watch her care completely about something small and beautiful and alive. The ability to not be so crushed under the weight of survival that he missed it while it was happening. He needed Thursday to go right. He understood that with a clarity that had nothing to do with ambition. That evening, after Lily was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with a new folder. He had found a clean one in the bottom of a kitchen drawer. The kind that comes in a pack of 10 and you never remember buying, and he printed new pages at the library website using his account. Because the library printer was still 11 cents a page, and he still had exactly that much to spend. And he spread everything out on the table and started again. He didn't think of it as starting over. He thought of it as starting with more information. Because now he knew something he hadn't known Tuesday morning. He knew that Olivia Hart was a woman who had built a billion-dollar company and still walked to work. He knew she moved through a crowd without a detail team or a driver or the buffer of importance that most people in her position built around themselves like a second skin. He knew that when she was scared, when she came back to herself after the oxygen mask and the asphalt in the ambulance, her first instinct was to look for the person who had helped her and say thank you properly. That told him things about the company she'd built. Companies reflected their founders, not always in the obvious ways. Not in the mission statements or the branded values printed on lobby walls. But in the choices the founder made when they were scared and the performance wasn't required. He wrote that down. He wrote, "She wanted to know what I was walking toward. Not who I was, what I was moving toward." He underlined it. He didn't know yet what he was going to do with that. But he filed it the same way he filed everything clean. Specific, in a place he could find it when it mattered. At 11:40, he closed the folder and went to bed. He slept better than he had in 3 weeks. What he did not know what was happening 22 blocks north, while Ethan slept, was that Marcus Vale had spent the afternoon on 2 phone calls and 1 in-person meeting. And by the time Marcus left the office at 8:15, he had a file on Ethan Brooks that was 6 pages long. The man who had compiled it was named Garrett, who had worked in corporate intelligence for 11 years and was very good at finding the shape of a person from public records, things that public records didn't say. The file said 36 years old, widower, wife deceased 3 years ago, vehicular accident, 1 daughter, multiple jobs, current primary employment, a mid-level facilities management position at a commercial property group. No degree beyond an associate's. No corporate background. References: a night nurse named Daniel Chu and a retired postal worker named Rosa Delgado. Marcus read it twice. Then he read it a 3rd time. And the thing that bothered him was not what the file contained, but what it didn't. There was nothing in there that explained why Olivia Hart, who had not personally intervened in a hiring decision in 4 years, had called James Whitfield from an ambulance and asked that this specific name be rescheduled. That gap, the space between what the file said and what Olivia had done, was the thing Marcus couldn't fit into any pattern he recognized. He didn't like things that didn't fit patterns. He called Garrett back. "Dig further," he said. "I want to know what he does that isn't on paper. That takes more time. You have until Wednesday night." He hung up and looked out his 14th floor window at the city below and turned over in his mind the phrase James Whitfield had used when relaying Olivia's message to the scheduling team. Real door, not a courtesy one. Marcus understood what a real door meant. It meant Olivia thought Ethan Brooks could actually do the job. Which meant Ethan Brooks was not a feel-good story. He was a problem. Marcus Vale had been managing problems for 9 years. He opened his laptop and started drafting a memo about interview evaluation standards. Nothing specific. Nothing that could be traced directly to any candidate, just a clean, Professional document about the importance of maintaining rigorous criteria in the current hiring cycle. He was very good at this. The memo would be in 3 inboxes by morning. And Ethan Brooks, sleeping in a small apartment 22 blocks south, with a new folder on the kitchen table and a daughter with 48 birds on a list, had no idea that the second hardest thing about Thursday morning was not going to be the interview. It was going to be walking into a room where someone had already decided he didn't belong and proving, without raising his voice or losing his footing, that they were wrong. He had done harder things. He just didn't know yet that he was going to have to. Thursday came, the way important days always come exactly like any other day. Which was the cruelest part. Ethan was up at 4:40. Not because the alarm went off, because his body understood that something was at stake and refused to let him sleep past it. He lay in the dark for 11 minutes, staring at the ceiling, running through nothing specific, not the interview questions, not the panel members, not the notes in the new clean folder on the table. Just breathing, just being inside the day before it started. He had learned to do that after Claire died. The first few months, he had filled every quiet moment with noise, the television on in the background, the radio while he cooked, his phone in his hand, scrolling things he didn't care about. Because quiet was where grief lived, and grief in those early months was not something he could look at directly. But eventually, the noise became more exhausting than the grief, and he had learned slowly and badly at first to sit inside the silence and let it be what it was. Now he used the quiet differently. He used it to locate himself, to find the still point inside whatever the day was going to ask of him. He got up at 4:51. He made coffee. He made Lily's lunch. He sat at the table with the folder open in front of him and read through his notes one final time. Not to memorize them, but to confirm that he still believed them. That was the check he always ran on his own, thinking not whether it sounded good, but whether he still meant it when he read it cold in the early morning. He still meant it. He closed the folder. Lily came out of her room at 6:50 with her hair already in the 2 braids she had taught herself to do after watching a YouTube video 17 times, which she had done specifically so Ethan wouldn't have to learn it, which was the kind of consideration that still hit him somewhere without warning. She looked at him. She looked at the folder. She looked at his suit, the same suit, which Mrs. Delgado had helped him press with an actual iron 2 days ago. The tear in the sleeve repaired with a needle and thread by Mrs. Delgado's hands while she told him in Spanish and broken English that the suit was fine. He was fine, and he needed to stop looking at the sleeve like it had personally failed him. "You look good," Lily said. "Yeah? You look like the kind of person who already has the job, and they just don't know it yet." He looked at his daughter, 8 years old, standing in the kitchen in her school clothes with her braids and her matter-of-fact certainty, and felt the thing he always felt when she did this, a complicated warmth that had grief inside it somewhere. Because she was so completely herself, and also so completely Claire's. And both of those things were true at the same time, and sometimes they hit simultaneously. "Eat your oatmeal," he said. "I still hate oatmeal." "I know. Brown sugar's in it." She sat down, she ate. He dropped her at Mrs. Delgado's at 7:35. This time, Lily looked back at the door. Just once, and held up 4 fingers. He'd told her once that 4 was a good number, stable. Solid 4 corners to everything that held, and she had filed it away and brought it back in moments like this. He held up 4 fingers back. Then he turned and walked toward Carver Street. He arrived at 8:17. The building was exactly what he'd expected from the outside clean lines. Glass front, the kind of understated corporate presence that said we don't need to impress you and meant it. He stood on the sidewalk for 30 seconds and looked at it. Not because he was intimidated, because he wanted to see it clearly before he went in. He had a habit of doing that with things that mattered, looking at them straight on. 4 minutes started. Then he walked through the main entrance, The lobby was large and quiet, and the woman at the desk was professional and efficient, and had him badged and directed to the 14th floor in under 3 minutes. The elevator was fast. The 14th floor was cooler than the lobby. A young man in a blue jacket met him at the elevator and walked him down a corridor to a room that held a long table and 4 people already seated. Ethan walked in. He looked at the 4 faces at the table and read them the way he always read rooms, not for threat or opportunity, but for truth. Who was comfortable? Who was performing comfort? Who had already made up their mind about something? The man at the far left had already made up his mind. Ethan knew it before the man opened his mouth. Knew it from the specific quality of stillness. The way he held his pen, the angle of his shoulders not hostile exactly, but closed. Pre-decided. The body language of someone who was attending a process they had already concluded. The nameplate in front of him, said Marcus Vale. A woman in the center introduced herself as Patricia Keene, Director of Operations. She had the measured warmth of someone who was good at their job and knew and didn't need to perform it. Beside her was a man named David Cho from Analytics. Young, genuinely curious expression, the kind of person who asked questions because he actually wanted to know the answers. Fourth was a woman named Sandra Reyes from HR, who was watching Ethan with the particular attention of someone who had seen a lot of people walk through that door and was still interested in what each new one brought. Mr. Brooks, Patricia said, thank you for coming in. We've had a chance to review your application materials. Before we start, I want to confirm you understand that this is a standard evaluation process. All candidates are assessed on the same criteria. I understand completely, Ethan said. I wouldn't want it any other way. He watched Marcus Vale's pen move. A small note. He couldn't see what it said. Let's start with your background, Patricia said. Your resume shows facilities management, multi-site coordination, some logistics work. Can you walk us through how those experiences connect to what we do here? Sure. He didn't open the folder. He'd decided that in the elevator. The folder stayed closed. Most of what I've done professionally doesn't look like corporate operations from the outside. But operations is operations. The problems are the same. You have resources. You have constraints. You have people who need to communicate across gaps they can't always see. And you have decisions that need to be made before all the information is in. That's what I've been doing. The industries are different. The mechanics are identical. David Cho leaned forward slightly. Can you give us a specific example of a decision you made with incomplete information that turned out to be correct? Yes, Ethan said. 18 months ago, I managed a 12-building commercial portfolio that was running a consistent maintenance backlog. The obvious answer was, we needed more technicians. What I found when I actually mapped the work orders was that we didn't have a labor shortage. We had a routing problem. The technicians were spending 30% of their available hours driving between sites because assignments were being made alphabetically by building name, not geographically. I rerouted the schedules based on proximity clusters. Backlog cleared in 6 weeks. No new hires. David wrote something. Sandra was nodding slowly. Marcus Vale had not moved. That's an efficiency solution, Marcus said. His voice was even and professional and completely flat. It doesn't speak to strategic operations at the level this position requires. Rerouting maintenance schedules is not the same as managing enterprise-level operational frameworks. The room went quiet in the specific way. Rooms go quiet when someone says something that lands harder than they intended, or exactly as hard as they intended. Ethan looked at Marcus Vale directly. You're right, he said. It's not the same. But the thinking behind it is. He paused. Just a beat. The pattern underneath that routing problem is the same pattern underneath your vendor contract lag in the third quarter supply chain reports. Resources are available. Coordination is broken. Nobody's mapped the actual flow because they're looking at the parts instead of the system. He paused again. I looked at your public operational reports before I came in. The problem in your level 1 coordinator turnover isn't compensation. It's that the people doing the work don't have a clear line of communication to the people making the decisions. They're solving problems in isolation, and nobody's aggregating what they learn. That's not a staffing issue. That's a structural one. The silence after that was different. Patricia Keene set her pen down. David Cho had stopped writing and was just looking at Ethan. Sandra Reyes had her head tilted at a very specific angle that Ethan associated with people who were recalibrating something. Marcus Vale's jaw had tightened by a fraction. Not enough to be obvious. Enough to be real. You analyzed our operational reports, Patricia said. Not a question. A statement she was examining. 3 weeks' worth, Ethan said. Everything in the public domain. I wanted to understand the actual job before I interviewed for it. And what's your conclusion? Patricia said. About the structural problem you mentioned. The information exists, Ethan said. It's already inside the company. The people doing the daily work know exactly where the friction points are. The issue is that nobody above the coordinator level is in a position to hear it consistently. So the people with the answers aren't being asked the right questions. And the people asking the questions are too far from the work to know what they're missing. He leaned forward slightly. The fix isn't complicated. It's uncomfortable. Because it means the people in the expensive offices have to be willing to listen to people they've been ignoring. Marcus Vale put his pen down on the table. The sound was small and precise. That's a fairly broad indictment of an organization you've never worked in, Marcus said. It's an observation based on available data, Ethan said. I'm happy to be wrong, but I'd want to see the internal numbers before I commit to that. Marcus looked at him steadily. You'd want to see internal numbers. If the goal is an honest evaluation, yes, that's how you find out if the observation holds. Another silence. This one was harder to read. Then Patricia said, We're going to take a short break. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee? Water would be great. Thank you. Patricia stood. David followed. Sandra gathered her notes. Marcus Vale stood last and walked out without looking at Ethan again. Which told Ethan more than anything Marcus had said in the last 30 minutes. He sat alone in the room. He opened the folder. He looked at his notes. Not because he needed them, but because it settled something in him to see his own handwriting the specific proof that he had been here before the moment started. That he had prepared. That whatever happened next was not going to be a surprise he hadn't considered. He closed the folder. He waited. What he didn't know, because he couldn't know it, was that 40 feet down the corridor, Patricia Keene was standing outside the break room with her arms crossed, looking at Marcus Vale and saying, in the measured tone she used when she was choosing words carefully, I want to hear your concern, specifically. My concern, Marcus said, is that we're evaluating someone with no enterprise background, no relevant degree, and a file that looks like a community college course catalog, because the CEO had an unusual morning. That's not a concern about the candidate, Patricia said. That's a concern about the process. The process is the concern. If we bring someone in through a side door, Olivia said real door. Not courtesy one. Olivia said a lot of things from an ambulance. Marcus's voice stayed even. Professional. I'm not questioning her judgment. I'm questioning whether a single dramatic incident in the street is a sufficient basis for reconsidering our hiring criteria. Patricia looked at him for a moment. He knew about the vendor lag, she said. It's in the public reports. He'd already mapped the coordinator turnover as a structural problem, not a compensation one. We've had 3 consultants in here, in 18 months, who didn't get there. He's articulate. That's not the same as capable, Marcus. Patricia's voice was quiet and direct. I've been running operations evaluations for 11 years. I know the difference between someone who rehearsed the right answers and someone who actually understands the problem. That man in there understands the problem. She paused. Your memo about evaluation standards is noted, but I'm running this panel, and we're finishing the interview. She walked back down the corridor. Marcus stayed where he was for a moment. Then he took out his phone and typed a single sentence, a number that wasn't in the company directory. The sentence said, "Accelerate the timeline." He put the phone away. He walked back to the interview room. The second half of the evaluation was different in texture from the first. Patricia ran a case scenario, a hypothetical operational crisis involving a vendor failure and a compressed deadline and a communication breakdown between 3 departments. She gave Ethan the parameters and 15 minutes to develop a response framework. He asked 4 questions before the 15 minutes started. David Cho watched him ask the questions with the expression of a man watching something confirm a theory he'd had. Ethan spent 9 of the 15 minutes writing. 3 pages. Clean and fast, no crossing out. He had a way of working through a problem that was almost physical, like he was building something with his hands. Each piece placed in a specific location because it connected to the next one. When he presented the framework, he started with what he didn't know. That was the thing that made Sandra Reyes look up from her notes. He said, "Before I walk through the response, I want to flag the 3 assumptions I've had to make because the scenario parameters don't give us this information." And he listed them. Clean and specific, with a note on how each one would change the approach if the assumption turned out to be wrong. Patricia nodded once, slowly. Marcus was making notes. Ethan walked through the framework. It was not the most elegant solution in the world. He said so himself. This is the version that works with the information available. Not the version that would work if we had 2 more weeks and full internal access. Those are different solutions, and I want to be clear which one I'm presenting. When he finished, the room was quiet for a moment. Then David Cho said, "Can I ask you something off the case?" "Sure. Why do you want this specific job?" "Not this company in general. This position." Ethan looked at him. "Because it's the place where the actual problems live. Senior coordinator is the last level of management that's still close enough to the daily work to see what's really happening. Everything above it is abstraction. I want to work in the place where it's still real." David nodded slowly. Like the answer had landed somewhere specific, Marcus Vale's voice came from the far end of the table. "Mr. Brooks. Flat, professional, deliberate. I'd like to ask you directly about something, okay? You have no degree beyond an associate's. You have no experience in a corporate environment above the facilities level. You have no credentials in strategic operations management." He paused. "Why should this panel recommend you over candidates who have spent years building those qualifications?" The room held its breath. Ethan looked at Marcus Vale, without flinching and without heat. "Because credentials tell you what someone studied," he said. "They don't tell you what someone does when the answer isn't in the textbook." He paused. "I've managed crisis situations without money, without staff, without institutional support, and with the option of escalating to someone above me. I've fixed broken systems that other people gave up on. I've learned how to find the real problem underneath the stated problem, which is a different skill than knowing the right terminology for it." Another pause. "I'm not saying my background is equivalent to a formal education. I'm saying it built something a formal education doesn't always build. And I think you already know which of those things is harder to find." Marcus Vale looked at him. Ethan looked back. The silence was exactly as long as it needed to be. Patricia Keene closed her folder. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. We'll be in touch within 48 hours. He stood. He shook hands, Patricia, then David, then Sandra. When he reached Marcus, Marcus shook his hand with the precise, controlled firmness of a man who had made a decision and wasn't going to show it. Ethan walked out. He was in the elevator before he let himself exhale. He didn't know what the panel was going to decide. He'd told himself he was okay with either outcome, and he mostly believed it, which was the best you could ever honestly say about something that mattered. He stepped out into the November air and stood on the Carver Street sidewalk and looked at nothing in particular for a moment. His phone buzzed. A text from Lily. "How did it go?" He typed back. "I told them the truth. That's all I can do." 3 dots appeared. Then that's enough, Mrs. D made empanadas. Hurry up. He put his phone in his pocket and started walking. He was 6 blocks south when a different thing happened, a thing he hadn't planned for, which was becoming a pattern with this week. A woman fell into step beside him. Not Olivia Hart. Someone he didn't recognize, middle 30s. Sharp eyes, a canvas bag over one shoulder, moving with the particular purpose of someone who had been waiting for him to come out of that building. Ethan Brooks? She said. He slowed. Yes, my name is Carla Diaz. I work in Level 1 operations at Hart Innovations. I've been there 4 years. She paused. I know what you said in that room today. He stopped walking. How? David Cho is a friend of mine. He texted me during the break. She wasn't apologetic about it. He said, you named the coordinator turnover problem. Specifically, I did. I'm one of the people who left. 8 months ago. She looked at him with the directness of someone who had thought carefully about this conversation before starting it. What you said about the communication gap, the people doing the work, knowing the answer, and nobody above them being able to hear it, that's exactly right. That's exactly why I left. Ethan looked at her. Why are you telling me this? Because if you get the job, she stopped. Adjusted. If you get the job and you're actually serious about what you said, there are people still in that building who have been waiting for someone to ask them the right questions for a very long time. She reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper and held it toward him. That's not a list of complaints. It's a list of specific operational problems that the Level 1 team documented over 2 years. Problems they reported through the proper channels. Problems that went nowhere. He took the paper. He looked at it. It was dense with specific detail dates, incident numbers, department codes. This was not someone venting frustration. This was someone who had done the work of building a record. Why didn't this go anywhere, he said. Because the person whose job it was to escalate it decided it was more useful to him if it didn't. She paused. His name is on the door of the office on the east corner of the 14th floor. Ethan looked up from the paper. Marcus Vale, she said. He held the paper in both hands and looked at Carla Diaz and understood that the interview had been the easy part. The real problem, the one beneath the stated problem, the one he'd told the panel, was always the one that mattered, was already showing him its shape. He folded the paper carefully and put it in his jacket pocket alongside the folder. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me yet, Carl said. Vale's been at that company 9 years. He knows where every body is buried. And if he decides you're a problem, she held his gaze. He's very good at making problems disappear quietly. Ethan nodded once. She turned and walked back the way she'd come. No goodbye. No drama, just the particular efficiency of a person who had said what they came to say and didn't need anything from the saying of it. He stood on the sidewalk with the folded paper in his pocket and the folder under his arm and the cold November air coming off the street. 48 hours. That was how long Patricia Keene had said. He had 48 hours before the decision landed. And in his pocket was a document that changed the shape of everything he thought he'd understood about what the decision was actually for. He started walking again. Behind him, on the 14th floor of a building on Carver Street, Marcus Vale was sitting at his desk reading a reply from Garrett that had come in 11 minutes ago. The reply said, "Found something, call me." Marcus called. He listened for 4 minutes without speaking. When he hung up, he sat very still for a long moment. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and took out a separate phone, not his company phone. A different one, and made a call that would not appear on any Hart Innovations record. What Garrett had found was not about Ethan's background. It was about the document Carla Diaz had been quietly assembling for 8 months. And Marcus Vale now understood that the problem was not the interview. The problem was that if Ethan Brooks walked into that building with the right clearance level and the right access and the right instinct for following a problem to its source, the thing Marcus had spent 3 years keeping buried was going to come up into the light. He couldn't let that happen. He had 4 moves available to him. He was already making the first one. The call came at 7:14 Friday morning. Ethan was standing at the kitchen sink, rinsing Lily's breakfast bowl, when his phone buzzed on the counter. He looked at the screen. James Whitfield, Art Innovations Personnel. 48 hours hadn't passed yet. He dried his hands. He picked up Mr. Brooks. Yes, I'm calling with the panel's decision. A pause that was 1 second too long. The evaluation committee has concluded that while your interview demonstrated strong analytical instincts, the consensus is that the position requires a candidate with more direct, enterprise-level experience. We appreciate your time, and we wish you well in your search. Ethan stood at the kitchen sink and held the phone against his ear and let the sentence finish arriving. I understand, he said. We'll keep your materials on file should Mr. He kept his voice even. Not cold even. Can you tell me if the decision was unanimous? A pause. I'm not able to share the specifics of the panel deliberation. That's fine. Thank you for calling. He hung up. He set the phone down on the counter. He stood there for a moment, with both hands flat on the edge of the sink, looking at nothing, letting himself feel exactly what it was, not the sharp grief kind of loss, but the particular exhaustion of something you prepared for, completely and lost anyway. The kind that asked the question you tried not to ask. What exactly was the point of doing everything right? He breathed once, deep, the way his father had taught him. Then he picked up his phone and called Danny. Danny answered on the second ring, which meant he was still awake from his night shift and hadn't gone to bed yet. Talk to me, Danny said. That was how Danny answered when he could tell from the contact name alone that something had happened. They passed, Ethan said. A silence, then unanimous? I asked. He wouldn't say. Then it wasn't unanimous, Danny said. If it was clean, they'd have told you. They dodged that question when somebody on the panel wanted you. Ethan had thought the same thing. He hadn't let himself hold on to it. Doesn't change the outcome. No, Danny agreed. It doesn't. A pause. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. You have the paper. The one the woman gave you. Carla Diaz. Yeah. What are you going to do with it? Ethan looked at the folded paper on the kitchen table where he'd left it the night before. He had read it twice after Lily went to sleep. It was 11 pages. Not the single sheet it had looked like when Carla handed it to him. She had folded it small and dense. 11 pages of documented operational failures, each one time-stamped, each one with a record of internal reporting that went nowhere, and most of them pointing, in the language of process notes and department codes, toward the same gap in the chain of accountability. The gap that Marcus Vale sat in. I don't know yet, he said again. Ethan. Yeah, you're not someone who does nothing. He was quiet for a moment. I know. So what's the actual question? He picked up the paper. He looked at the first page, at the dates, at the incident codes, at the names of the Level 1 coordinators who had filed reports that went into a drawer and stayed there. People who had done the right thing and been answered with silence. The question, he said slowly, is whether I do something with this because it's the right thing, or because I'm angry that I didn't get the job. And those need to be different reasons. Danny was quiet on the other end. Then that's why you're a better man than most people I know. Don't, I'm serious. I know you are. That's why I'm telling you to stop. Ethan set the paper down. Let me think. Go sleep. You've been up all night. Call me if you need to talk through it. I will. He hung up. He sat at the kitchen table with the paper and the folder and the cold morning, and he thought about what Carla Diaz had said on the sidewalk. Vale's been there 9 years. He knows where every body is buried. And if he decides you're a problem, he's very good at making problems disappear quietly. He thought about the 11 pages. He thought about the names on those pages, people who had seen something real and reported it, and been met with the institutional silence of a system that had decided their information was inconvenient. He thought about Lily, who would be awake in 20 minutes and would want to know about the call. Because she always wanted to know, because she was 8 years old and still believed that the world generally gave you back what you put into it. He wasn't ready to explain to her why that wasn't always true. He picked up the paper again, and then his phone rang. Not Whitfield. Not Danny, Olivia Hart. He stared at the screen for 2 full rings. He answered Ethan. Her voice was direct, no preamble. I heard from Patricia Keene this morning. The decision was communicated to me at 7:14, he said. I know what time it was. I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer me honestly. Okay. Did you know something was wrong with the process before the call came in? He paused. One beat, honest and specific. I knew Marcus Vale had made a decision before the interview started. I didn't know what leverage he had to make it stick. Silence on her end. Then how did you know about Marcus? I didn't. Someone who used to work in your level 1 operations found me on the street after the interview. Another silence. Longer. Carla Diaz, Olivia said. He didn't confirm it. He didn't need to, Ethan. Her voice had changed. It was still controlled, but underneath the control, there was something moving. What did she give you? Documentation. Operational failure reports from the Level 1 team. Spanning approximately 2 years, all of them filed through proper internal channels. None of them escalated beyond a specific point in the management chain. What point? The office on the east corner of the 14th floor. The silence that followed was the specific kind that meant someone was absorbing something they had suspected but hadn't let themselves confirm. How detailed is the documentation? Olivia said. 11 pages. Time-stamped. Incident coded. Specific. He heard her exhale. Not dramatically. Just the sound of someone whose breath shifted when the ground moved under them. Can I see it? She said. Yes, he said. But not because I want the job back. I want you to understand that. Whatever you do with this information, that's separate from the hiring decision. I'm not trading one for the other. I know you're not, she said. That's why I'm asking. He thought for a moment. There's a coffee place on Meridian and 7th. Neutral ground. I can be there at 9. 9 works. She hung up. He sat with the phone in his hand and looked at the paper on the table and understood that the morning had just reorganized itself completely around something larger than a job interview. He was still sitting there when Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, braids slightly crooked from sleep, looking at him with Claire's eyes. They said no, she said. Not a question. They said no. She came to the table and sat down across from him. Which was what she did when she was taking something seriously. She didn't hug him. She sat across from him because she was treating him like a person. Not a problem, which was something she had figured out on her own and which he found remarkable every time. Is it over? She said. I don't think so, he said. Okay. She looked at the paper on the table without touching it. Is that important? Very. Are you going to do something about it? I'm going to try. She nodded once. The way she nodded, she had filed something and was done processing it. Can I have cereal instead of oatmeal? He almost laughed. He got up and got her the cereal. He dropped her at school at 8:10. Different from Mrs. Delgado's actual school drop-off, which he usually did on Fridays. He watched her walk through the door without looking back. Full confidence, backpack bouncing, and he stood on the sidewalk for exactly 5 seconds. Then he started walking toward Meridian and 7th. Olivia was already there when he arrived. She had a table in the back, away from the window, which was the choice of someone who had learned that public conversations needed buffers. She had a coffee in front of her and her hands around it, and she looked, for the first time since he'd known her, like something had cracked slightly in the professional surface. He sat down. He put the 11 pages on the table between them. She picked them up without speaking and read them. She read the way people read when they're not performing, reading no reaction on her face. No sighs or murmured responses, just her eyes moving and the occasional stillness when something stopped her. She read all 11 pages. She set them down. She looked at him. How long have you known? He said. I haven't known this, she said carefully. I've known something. There's a difference. She paused. For about a year I've had the sense that something in the level 1 communication chain was off. Numbers that didn't quite add up. Turnover that couldn't be fully explained by the compensation analysis. But every time I brought it to operations leadership, I got a clean explanation that was technically correct and somehow still didn't
Satisfy.
because the explanations came from the same place the problem came from, Ethan said. Yes. She looked at the pages again. These are real reports. I know some of these incident codes. I remember some of these dates. She looked up. How did Carla Diaz get this to you? She left 8 months ago. She'd been building it for 2 years before she left. She was waiting for a reason to give it to someone. Olivia was quiet for a moment. And I never reached out to her after she resigned. He didn't say anything. Because he didn't need to. That's on me, Olivia said. Flat. Direct. No performance of guilt. Just the clean statement of a person who was accurate about their own failures. I should have. When you lose someone from a team with that tenure, you find out why. I delegated that conversation and I shouldn't have. He respected that. He didn't say so. He just let it stand. What do you want to do with this? He said. I want to verify it first. Independently. I have an external auditor I've worked with before who can cross-reference the incident codes against our internal records without going through the standard operations chain. She paused. That takes 5 to 7 days. And Vale? She looked at him carefully. Marcus has been at this company for 9 years. He's built significant internal relationships. If I move on this incorrectly, he has enough social capital to reframe whatever I do as a leadership overcorrection. I need the verification to be airtight before anything else happens. Meanwhile, he's still sitting on the 14th floor.
Yes.
And whatever he's been doing with the information those level 1 reports contained. He's still doing it. Yes, her jaw was tight. I know what this looks like. Ethan. I know it looks like I'm protecting myself. I think you're being strategic, he said. That's different. She looked at him. Most people would have led with anger. Anger doesn't fix the documentation problem. 5 to 7 days fixes the documentation problem. Something moved across her face. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated than that. The expression of someone recognizing a quality they'd been trying to locate for a long time. I want to offer you something, she said. Olivia, not the position. Not yet. A consulting contract. 30 days. Specifically to work with the Level 1 operations team independently. Not through the standard management chain and document what's actually happening on the ground. She paused. I should have done this 6 months ago, when I first had the feeling. I'm doing it now. He looked at her steadily. If Vale finds out I'm in the building with that kind of access, he's going to move fast, I know. He already tried to kill my candidacy. If he thinks I'm a bigger threat than that, I know, she said again. Which is why the contract runs through my office, directly. Not through operations leadership. Not through HR in the standard chain. Through me, she paused. It's not a gift, Ethan. It's a job. 40 hours over 30 days. Deliverable is a documented operational assessment. If it finds nothing, it finds nothing. If it confirms what Carla Diaz spent 2 years building, then I have 2 independent sources and an auditor and something I can actually use. He looked at the 11 pages on the table. He thought about the names on those pages. The coordinators who had filed reports and been answered with silence. People who had done the work of seeing something real and telling the truth about it and been buried under the institutional weight of a man who needed them not to be heard. The people who filed these reports, he said. Are any of them still in the building? Some. I'd have to check specifically which ones. That's where I start, he said. Not with the numbers. With the people. She nodded. And I want Carla Diaz to know what's happening, he said. She doesn't need to be involved if she doesn't want to be. But she deserves to know that the thing she built wasn't for nothing. Olivia looked at him for a long moment. Agreed, she said quietly. He picked up the 11 pages and handed them back to her. Make a copy. Give me the copy. You keep the original. She nodded. He watched her go to the counter and ask for the shop's printer, the kind of request that in most places got a raised eyebrow. But the woman behind the counter just nodded and took the pages without comment, which was the specific grace of a neighborhood place that had seen enough of life to not be surprised by what people needed. While he waited, his phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize. It said, "I know you met with her this morning. You don't understand what you're getting into. Walk away from this, and I'll make sure the decision gets reconsidered. Push further, and I promise you, the consulting contract won't be the only thing that disappears." He read it twice. He took a screenshot. He sent the screenshot to Danny with a single line. "Keep this somewhere safe." Danny replied in 40 seconds. "Already backed up. You okay?" He typed back, "Getting there." Olivia came back with 2 sets of pages and set the copy in front of him. She sat down. She looked at him, and something in her expression shifted. "What?" she said. He turned his phone face up on the table so she could read the text message. She read it. She read it again. Her face went very still in the way faces go still when someone is deciding very quickly and very clearly what they're going to do about something. "He just made a mistake," she said. "Yes, he did. He put it in writing. He did." She looked up at him. "How long have you been sending things to a backup location?" "Since the screenshot happened." 40 seconds ago." He paused. "But I'm going to need you to understand something. Olivia, this text message changes the shape of what we're doing. This isn't just an operational audit now. This is evidence of active intimidation of a potential whistleblower scenario. That has legal dimensions I'm not qualified to navigate. I have a general counsel," she said. "Then you need to call her before the end of today." "Her," Olivia repeated, with the faintest edge of something like dark humor. "You assumed female. You built this company. I assumed you hired people you respected." She almost smiled. "Her name is Rebecca Cho. She's been with me since year 3. Call her today, I will." She picked up her coffee and held it in both hands, which was what he'd noticed she did when she was steadying herself without wanting to show it. "Ethan, I owe you an apology." "For what? For the interview?" "For letting a process I supervise become something that could be manipulated by someone I trusted. The result doesn't change. Because of this, you still deserved a fair evaluation and didn't get one. And I'm sorry for that." He looked at her directly. "I don't need the apology. I need the next 30 days to do the work correctly." She nodded. "And I need one more thing," he said. "What?" "I need you to be honest with me if anything you find in the audit is something you'd rather not find. I've worked for people before who asked for the truth and flinched when it showed up." He paused. "I can't do this job if I have to manage what you're willing to hear." The question landed hard. He saw it land. He didn't soften it. Olivia Hart was quiet for a full 5 seconds. "I flinched 12 months ago," she said. "That's why we're sitting here right now. I asked for the truth from operations leadership, and I accepted an explanation that satisfied me, because the alternative was complicated, and I had 3 other crises on my desk." She paused. "I won't do it again." "Okay," he said. He picked up the copy of Carla's document. He folded it and put it in his jacket. He stood up. "Monday morning," she said. 8 o'clock. I'll have a temporary badge and building access arranged directly through my office. You'll work from a space on the 3rd floor, away from the 14th. And Vale? Vale doesn't know about the contract yet. When he finds out, and he will find out, because he knows this building better than I do in some ways, I want you already inside and already working." Ethan thought about that for a moment. About the text message on his phone. About the 4 moves Marcus had said he had available to himself. In the conversation Ethan hadn't been in, but could read clearly from its results. "He's going to try to make me look like the problem," Ethan said. "I know. He's going to find something in my background or my work history or my personal file that he can use to reframe the narrative. He's good at that." "He is," Olivia said. "He's been doing it for 9 years and I let him, because he was effective and I didn't look at how." She paused. "But he's never done it to someone I was watching directly. And I'm watching directly now." Ethan nodded once. He started toward the door. "Ethan," she said behind him. He stopped. Lily's bird list, she said. 48 species, he turned. I looked it up after you told me, she said. The cedar waxwing. It's a beautiful bird. She paused. She's going to get to 50. He looked at Olivia Hart across the coffee shop and saw, for a moment, past the CEO and the billion-dollar company, and the careful control, saw the person who had built all of it, and was still, underneath everything, someone who looked things up because she cared about the detail. She's going to get to 100, he said. He walked out into the Friday morning. He had a weekend before Monday. He used both days. Saturday he spent with Lily, the park, the binoculars. The list. They added a white-throated sparrow at 2:15 in the afternoon near the South Path. And Lily wrote it in the notebook with the same deliberate care she gave every entry. Number 49. And Ethan stood beside her in the cold and felt the stillness of a moment that asked nothing of him except to be present in it. Sunday he spent at the kitchen table. He read Carla's 11 pages 4 more times, not because he needed to memorize them, but because he needed to understand the shape of the problem completely before he walked into the building. He mapped the incident codes against the timeline. He identified 3 clusters of related failures that pointed to a pattern more specific than general negligence. Someone hadn't just been ignoring the reports. Someone had been making decisions based on information those reports contained and making them in a direction that benefited something other than the company. That was the thing that had been sitting at the edge of his thinking since Friday morning. The thing he hadn't said to Olivia yet, because he didn't have enough evidence to say it cleanly. This wasn't just suppression. This was use. The information in those reports was being used by someone, actively and deliberately, to make decisions that served a purpose Ethan hadn't fully identified yet. He wrote that down. He underlined it. He put his notes in the folder. He went to bed at 10:30 and lay in the dark and thought about Marcus Vale's text message, the specific phrasing of it, the confidence of it, the way it had come in 43 minutes after Ethan sat down with Olivia. Which meant Marcus had someone watching, or had access to something that let him see movement he shouldn't have been able to see. He thought about that for a long time. Then he closed his eyes. Monday was 6 hours away, and somewhere in a building on Carver Street, a man who had spent 9 years making himself indispensable by controlling what other people could see was about to learn something he hadn't prepared for. That the most dangerous person in any room was never the one with the most credentials. It was the one who knew how to listen to the people everyone else had stopped hearing. He walked into Hart Innovations at 7:58 Monday morning with a temporary badge, clipped it to his jacket, and a folder under his arm, and the specific calm of a man who had already decided what he was going to do before the day started. The 3rd floor was quieter than the 14th. Smaller offices. Lower ceiling, the kind of space that working level rather than management level. Olivia's assistant, a sharp young man named Torres, met him at the elevator and walked him to a small conference room with a table and 2 chairs and a laptop already open and logged in under a guest account. Ms. Hart says you have full read access to the operational database through this account, Torres said. Anything you need printed or pulled from archived files, you come to me directly, not through the building request system. Ethan looked at him. She told you why. She told me enough. Torres put a key card on the table. That gets you into the level 1 workspace on this floor and the supply records room on 2. It does not open anything on 14. I won't need 14, Ethan said. Not yet. Torres nodded and left him to it. Ethan sat down and opened the laptop and started with the oldest incident code in Carla's document. He pulled the original report from the database. He read it against Carla's notes. Then he pulled the next one and did the same thing, building the cross-reference manually, line by line. The way he built everything from the ground up, without assumptions about what he was going to find, sucked before he found it. By 9:30, he had confirmed the first cluster. By 11, he had confirmed the second. At 11:40, A woman knocked on the open conference room door and stood in the frame with her arms crossed and the cautious expression of someone who had been told something and wasn't sure yet whether to believe it. "You're the consultant," she said. "Ethan Brooks, Maya Reyes. Level 1 coordinator, 3 years." She paused. "Torres said you wanted to talk to the team. When people are willing," Ethan said. "I'm not here to put anyone in a difficult position." Little late for that. But she came in and sat down. And the fact that she sat down, rather than stayed standing, told him something. "What do you actually want to know?" "Tell me about the reports," he said. "Not the content. The process. What happened when you filed one?" She looked at him steadily. Then she started talking. She talked for 22 minutes without stopping. And what she described was so specific and so consistent with Carla's documentation that Ethan felt the shape of the problem lock into place the way pieces lock when you've been working a problem long enough to know what fit feels like. When she finished, she said, "Are you going to do anything with this? Or is this going to be like the last 2 times something came in and said they were going to do something with it?" What happened the last 2 times? First time was a general HR review 14 months ago. Second time was an independent efficiency consultant. 8 months ago. She paused. Both times the findings went to the operations leadership chain for review before anything was actioned. And the operations leadership chain is Marcus Vale's direct reports. Yes, Ethan wrote something in his notebook. Not a lot. Just enough. This time the findings go directly to Miss Hart, he said, not through any intermediate chain. Maya looked at him for a long moment. "How do I know that?" "You don't," he said. "Not yet. But I'm going to ask you to give me a week before you decide whether to believe it." She considered that. Then she stood up. "I'll tell the others you're here," she said. "The ones who are still here." She paused at the door. "Some of them left specifically because of this. You know that. I know. And they're not going to want to come back and do it again, if it goes nowhere again. I know that too." She left. He went back to the database. What he found in the next 3 hours was not what he had expected to find, which was the nature of real problems. They were never exactly the shape you thought they were going to be. The incident reports described a pattern of operational failures. That part was clear from Carla's document. But as he cross-referenced the reports against the internal financial records Olivia's account access had opened up, a different picture began to emerge underneath the one he'd been looking at. The failures weren't random. They were timed. Every cluster of unreported operational problems corresponded within a window of 2 to 3 weeks with a decision that benefited a specific set of external vendor contracts. Contracts that had been renegotiated, renewed, or expanded in the period immediately following each cluster. He sat back in his chair and looked at what he had built on the screen. This was not negligence. This was not a man ignoring reports because he was lazy or overwhelmed or indifferent. This was a man using suppressed operational data to create conditions that made certain vendor decisions look necessary. And those vendor decisions, he pulled 3 of them and read the contract summaries were going to a small group of companies, Hoopas Onerish, Hoop structure he couldn't see from inside the Hart Innovations database. He needed someone who could see ownership structures. He picked up his phone and called Danny. Danny answered on the first ring. Still awake again, because Danny ran on a schedule that made no biological sense. "I need a favor," Ethan said. "You know anyone in corporate accounting?" Outside of here?" "My sister-in-law does forensic accounting for a law firm. Can she look at vendor ownership records without it being an official engagement?" A pause. Informally. "What am I telling her?" "Tell her I have 3 vendor names and I need to know who owns them and whether any of the ownership chains connect to a single point. Give me the names." Ethan read them off the screen. "I'll call her now," Danny said. "Give me 2 hours." He hung up and went back to the database and kept pulling. At 2:15, Torres knocked and came in with a sandwich and a coffee, and set them on the table without comment, which Ethan understood as Olivia's way of keeping him functional without interrupting him. He ate without stopping work. At 3:40, Danny called back. My sister-in-law says hi, Danny said. She also says you owe her a very nice dinner for this because it took her 40 minutes, and she had 3 other things she was supposed to be doing. What did she find? All 3 of those vendors trace back through shell structures to a single holding company registered in Delaware. The holding company is called Vantage Operational Partners. A pause. She ran the registered agent and the original filing. You want to know whose name is on the original formation documents. Ethan was very still. Marcus Vale, he said. Close, Danny said. His brother-in-law. Guy named Richard Holt. But the sister Marcus Vale's wife is listed as a secondary beneficiary in the operating agreement. Ethan closed his eyes for exactly 3 seconds. He opened them. Danny, send me whatever your sister-in-law can put in a document. Even informal notes. I need something I can show someone that points to where to look officially. Already on it. You'll have it in 20 minutes. He hung up. He sat in the quiet of the 3rd-floor conference room and understood that what he was holding was not an operational audit finding. It was the mechanism of a long, careful, patient fraud. Marcus Vale had spent 9 years building his position inside Hart Innovations. He had used that position to suppress operational data that would have triggered vendor review processes. He had used the suppression to make bad vendor decisions look like necessary ones. And he had routed the financial benefit of those decisions to a company that his family controlled, a company that existed specifically to receive that benefit and leave no obvious trace back to him. It was not a perfect scheme. No scheme was perfect. But it had been running for long enough and quietly enough that without someone who knew how to follow the pattern from the operational level up rather than from the financial level down, it might have run for years more. Ethan thought about the Level 1 coordinators who had filed their reports. Maya and the others like her. Carla, who had spent 2 years building a document that no one had been positioned to receive until a Tuesday morning in November when a man on his way to an interview chose to stop instead of keep walking. He thought about the specific chain of it, the randomness that wasn't random. The way one choice, his choice, 14 days ago on a wet street, had opened a door that led here. He stood up. He picked up his notebook and his phone, and the printed document from Danny's sister-in-law that had arrived in his email while he was thinking. He went to find Torres. Torres was at his desk outside Olivia's 3rd-floor satellite office. I need to see her, Ethan said now. Not at the end of the day. Now. Torres looked at his face and picked up the phone. Olivia was in the doorway 30 seconds later. She took one look at him. Come in, she said. He sat across from her and laid it out. Not dramatically. Cleanly. The cross-referenced incident codes and the vendor contract timeline, and the ownership trace that Danny's sister-in-law had built in 40 minutes and the name at the end of the chain. He put the printed documents on the desk in front of her in the order he wanted her to read them. She read them. She read them the way she had read Carla's 11 pages in the coffee shop, completely. Without performance, her face still and her eyes moving. When she finished, she set the last page down very carefully. Like the paper itself was something that required handling. She was quiet for a moment. 9 years, she said. Yes, he's been doing this for the first vendor cluster. In the incident timeline is 6 years ago. 6 years and 4 months, Ethan said. That's the first cluster I can confirm. There may be earlier ones in records I don't have access to. She pressed her lips together. Not anger exactly. Worse than anger. The specific expression of someone who trusted their own judgment and is confronting the evidence that they were wrong to. Olivia. He waited until she looked at him. This isn't a failure of your judgment. It's a failure of your information chain. Those are different problems. I built the information chain. And he spent 6 years specifically corrupting the part of it that would have told you something was wrong. That's not a mistake on your part. That's a sophisticated operation by someone who understood exactly how you thought and used it. She was quiet. Rebecca Cho, he said. Your general counsel. Today. Yes. She straightened. He watched the composure come back, not false, not performance. but the genuine reorientation of a person who had processed what they needed to process and was moving into what came next. The external auditor is already 3 days into the verification. I'm going to call Rebecca and bring her in now. We'll need law enforcement contact at some point. This crosses into wire fraud territory if the vendor payments went through digital transfer. They did, Ethan said. Every one of them. She nodded. And Vale, he said. He doesn't know what you found yet. His access gets suspended this afternoon. Quietly, on a technical pretext, Rebecca will advise on the process from there. She paused. He'll figure it out within 24 hours. He's not a slow man. No, Ethan said. He's not. When he does, he's going to move. He's going to try to get ahead of it. He already tried, Ethan said. He pulled out his phone and showed her the text message from Friday. The screenshot he'd sent to Danny. He put the intimidation attempt in writing 4 days ago. That's already preserved in 3 separate locations. Olivia looked at the text on his phone screen. He's been careful for 6 years, she said quietly. And then he panicked. People who've been safe for a long time get careless when they feel the ground shift, Ethan said. He felt it shift when you called Whitfield from the ambulance. He's been reacting since then instead of thinking. She looked at him with something he had no clean word for. Not gratitude exactly. Something larger than that and more specific. You found all of this in 1 day, she said. I found what was already there, he said. Carla Diaz spent 2 years building the foundation. Maya Reyes and the others did the work of documenting the real problem while nobody was listening. I just followed what they'd already built. Don't minimize it. I'm not minimizing it. I'm being accurate about it. That's different. She almost smiled. It was the same almost smile from the ambulance gurney. The one that looked like someone using a muscle they'd been underutilizing. She picked up her phone and called Rebecca Cho. He sat quietly while she talked. Not listening to the details but to the tone crisp. Specific, no wasted words. The voice of a woman who had built something real and was fighting for it with the same energy she'd used to build it. He respected that. Not the power of it, the fight in it. When she hung up, she said, Rebecca's coming in at 5. She wants you there. I'll be there. He looked at his watch. 3:12. He had time. He went back to the 3rd floor and spent the next hour and 40 minutes finishing what he'd started, not because the legal process needed more from him tonight, but because the Level 1 team deserved to have their documentation complete. He pulled every incident code from Carla's list. He cross-referenced everyone. He wrote clean summary notes for each cluster, specific and usable. The kind of documentation that a forensic accountant or a federal investigator could follow without needing someone to explain the original thinking. He was finishing the last cluster when Maya knocked on the conference room door again. She looked at his face the way she'd looked at it that morning. Reading it. Something happened, she said. Something happened, he confirmed. She came in and sat down. Is it going to go somewhere this time? He looked at her directly. Yes. She held his gaze. She was trying to decide whether to believe it. The same way she'd been trying to decide that morning. But something in his face had changed since then, the specific change that happens when a person has moved from looking for something to having found it. What do I need to do, she said. Nothing tonight. Tomorrow, Rebecca Cho from Legal is going to want to talk to anyone who filed a report in that 2-year window. I'll give her the list. If you're willing to be on it. I want you on it. But it's your choice. I'm on it, Maya said without hesitating. He nodded. Ethan. She said his name like they'd known each other longer than a day. Which was the thing that happened sometimes when the truth moved fast enough between 2 people. Why did you keep going with this? They rejected you. You didn't have to walk back in here. He thought about it for a moment. Really thought about it, the way the question deserved. Because the reason I wanted the job in the first place was to be in the place where the real problems lived, he said. Turns out the real problem was bigger than the job description. He paused. And because there are people in this building who told the truth and nobody listened. That bothered me more than not getting hired. She looked at him. Your daughter's lucky, she said. I know, he said. He walked into Olivia's office at 5:02. Rebecca Cho was already there, early 50s. Silver hair, the steady, unhurried precision of someone who had seen complicated situations before and understood that the way you entered them determined everything about how they ended. She shook Ethan's hand and asked him 3 questions before she sat down. All 3 of them specific and pointed, and his answers to all 3 were the same. Clean, factual, sourced. She looked at Olivia after the 3rd answer. He's organized, Rebecca said, which in the language of a general counsel was a significant compliment. I know, Olivia said. The meeting ran 90 minutes. Rebecca asked for the documentation, the screenshots, the vendor ownership trace, and the cross-referenced incident timeline. Ethan provided all of it. She asked about Carla Diaz, and he explained the chain of contact. She asked about Danny's sister-in-law, and he was honest about the informality of the engagement, and Rebecca said that was fine. It was a pointer, not evidence, and she had a forensic accounting firm she used for exactly this kind of official verification. At 6:20, Rebecca closed her folder and looked at Olivia. We need to self-report, she said, before he does. If he goes to regulators first with a version of events that frames this as a company failure rather than an individual one, we lose control of the narrative. We go tomorrow morning. With everything Ethan has built, and we go proactively. Agreed, Olivia said. Marcus will be suspended pending investigation as of tonight. I'll draft the notice. We do it after 7, so the building is cleared. Agreed. Rebecca stood. She looked at Ethan. I'm going to need you available for the next 2 weeks. Not full-time, but available. Can you do that? Yes. Good. She extended her hand again. You did good work today. Other people did the hard part, he said. I just put it in order. She gave him the look of someone who knew the difference between modesty and accuracy and wasn't sure which one he was offering. Then she left. The office was quiet. Ethan and Olivia sat with the silence for a moment. I owe you an apology, Olivia said again. You don't. The interview. The panel. I let a compromised process stand because I was trying to demonstrate that I wasn't showing you favoritism. And in doing that, I let the person who corrupted the process make the decision. She paused. It's done, he said. It's not done, she said. Because now I need to offer you the position legitimately, and I can't do it without it looking like everything I said about a real door. Not a courtesy one, was Olivia. He waited until she stopped. Offer me a real evaluation. Put me back in front of Patricia Keene and David Cho. Not Marcus Vale's process. A clean one. He paused. If I earn it, I earn it. If I don't, I don't. But let it be real. She looked at him for a long time. Patricia already called me this afternoon, she said quietly. Before you came to this office. She said she'd reviewed the panel discussion and that the decision had not reflected the full range of views on the committee. She paused. Her words were, if that man is still available, we made a mistake. He was quiet. David Cho sent me an email at 2:57, she continued. He said, and I'm quoting directly, that in 15 years of evaluations, he had not met a candidate who identified a structural problem before the interview and understood it well enough to explain it to the people living inside it. She paused again. Sandra Reyes called the decision an outcome she could not reconcile with the evidence. He looked at his hands. Then at her. That's 3 out of 4, he said. The 4th one is currently being suspended pending investigation, she said. A silence. Then he laughed the same laugh from the street on Tuesday. The one that wasn't bitterness and wasn't false. The specific laugh of a man who recognized the universe making a point again. Olivia laughed too. The same careful, slightly out of practice laugh from the ambulance. But fuller this time. More certain. The position is yours if you want it, she said. When it passed, real door. Real evaluation result. Real offer. He thought about Lily, about Mrs. Delgado, and Danny, and the library printer at 11 cents a page, and the 4 months of preparation, and the Tuesday morning that had broken every plan he had and somehow delivered him here. He thought about the names on Carla's 11 pages. The people who had told the truth and waited. Yes, he said. I want it. She put out her hand. He shook it. Monday, she said. Official first day. But the consulting contract stays active through the legal process. Understood. He picked up his folder. He stood. Ethan, she said. He stopped. What you did in the street that morning, she said. I've been thinking about it every day since it happened. Not because of what it meant for me, because of what it cost you. You were 11 minutes from an interview that was going to change your life. And you stopped without thinking about it. He looked at her. I think about it too, sometimes, he said. What would have happened if I'd kept walking? If I'd decided that one morning, one chance, was worth more than whatever was happening on that street. He paused. And every time I think about it, I come to the same answer. I would have made the interview. I would have gone through the process with a panel that was already compromised. I might have gotten the job. Or I might have lost it to the same manipulation. And I never would have known what was actually happening in this building. He paused. So either way, I stopped at the right moment. She was quiet for a long moment. The right moment, she repeated softly. Sometimes the thing you think is costing you everything is the only path to the thing you actually needed to find, he said. I learned that from a bad couple of years. I'm still learning it. He walked out. He took the elevator to the lobby and walked through the main entrance onto Carver Street and stood for a moment in the evening air. The city moving around him the way it always did, without ceremony. Without acknowledgement, indifferent to what had happened in a third-floor conference room, or a CEO's office, or a street 11 days ago. He called Lily. She answered immediately, which meant she'd been waiting. Well, she said. I got it, he said, a pause. Then, in a voice that was trying very hard to stay measured, but wasn't entirely succeeding. I knew it, you knew it, I told you. Same door. Different day. You told me. He heard her talking to Mrs. Delgado in the background. Not the words exactly, but the tone excited. Vindicated. The sound of an 8-year-old who had been right about something and needed Mrs. Delgado to know it immediately. Come home, Lily said. Mrs. D made soup. I'm on my way. He put the phone in his pocket and started walking south. 22 blocks, the same 22 blocks he had walked 11 days ago with a folder under his arm, and a suit that was going to be ruined, and an interview he was going to miss, and a stranger he was going to save. And a door he hadn't known, yet he was walking toward. He walked them differently now. Not faster, not with more confidence exactly, but with the specific quality of presence that comes to a man when he has stopped trying to the shape of what's coming and started trusting the shape of who he is. 3 weeks later, Marcus Vail was formally charged. The forensic audit confirmed what Ethan's cross-referencing had pointed to: 6 years of vendor manipulation routed through Vantage operational partners, totaling just under $4 million in diverted contracts. The case moved quickly once it moved, because the documentation was clean, and the evidence chain was unbroken, and because Marcus had put his intimidation attempt in writing on a Friday morning when he was panicking, which was the kind of gift that prosecutor remembered at sentencing. Carla Diaz was called by Olivia personally. The conversation lasted 40 minutes. Carla did not come back to Heart Innovations. She had built something new in the 8 months since she'd left, and she wasn't walking away from it, but she sat with the knowledge that the 2 years she had spent building that document had not been wasted. And that was the thing she had needed to know. Maya Reyes was promoted to lead coordinator. Level 2, with a direct reporting line that bypassed the layers that had buried her reports for 3 years. She sent Ethan an email on her first day, in the new role that contained 4 words. About time, thank you. He kept that email. Olivia Hart reorganized the operational communication chain, which was the real structural fix underneath everything else, the thing that meant the next person who saw something real would have a clear path to say so. She brought in Patricia Keene to oversee the rebuild, which was the right decision, and she asked Ethan to consult on the Level 1 integration, which was also the right decision, and she did both of those things without announcing them as anything other than exactly what they were. She stopped performing certainty she didn't have. She started listening more and explaining less. Her company became, by the following year, measurably better in 3 specific metrics that Ethan had identified in his notes on the wet pavement outside the library printer. He never mentioned that to her, but she knew. On a Saturday in early February, Lily added a painted bunting to her list number 52. Spotted at the nature preserve 40 minutes outside the city, where Ethan had driven them because Lily had read that it was a possible location and decided that possible was good enough to try. She stood at the edge of the trail and looked at the bird through her $3 binoculars for a long time without speaking, which was the thing she did when something was too good to interrupt with language. Ethan stood beside her. He didn't say anything either. He just watched his daughter watch a bird in the particular stillness of a winter morning that asked nothing of either of them except to be inside it. And he thought about doors and choices and the specific arithmetic of a life where the worst mornings sometimes turned out to be the ones that led somewhere you couldn't have planned your way to. He had stopped a stranger from dying. He had lost his interview. He had found the real problem. He had told the truth about it, even when it cost him something. And the world which did not always give back what you put into it, which was not always fair, which did not operate on the logic of deserving, had given him something back anyway. Not because he had saved a CEO, not because the universe owed him a debt, but because a good man, moving through a hard world with his eyes open and his hands ready, will eventually find himself exactly where he was always supposed to be. Lily wrote 52 in the notebook. She looked up at him. She held up 4 fingers. He held up 4 back. They walked home,